We're going to get into this conversation here with Joe Rogan and Mark Zuckerberg, because Mark Zuckerberg, you know, he kind of said the quiet part out loud, kind of spilled the beans. Then we're sitting here and we're talking about censorship and what narrative is acceptable or not. And Mark Zuckerberg during this interview is going to give a little bit too much away, a little bit too much. So we're going to go through this, and then we're going to go to another clip from Second Thought that actually explains a little bit more how the censorship process works when it comes to companies like Google and Facebook, etc. So let's go ahead and get started with this.
When we take down something that we're not supposed to, I mean, that is like, I mean, that's the worst. I mean,
how
that's
do you
like
discern? Like how, like say, like these Christian Facebook pages. I don't know how they found out that 19 of 20 were fake, but if someone just says I am Bob Smith and they post as Bob Smith and they have a photograph but really what they're doing is trying to talk shit about Joe Biden and get people to vote Republican in the midterms. Like how do you know whether someone's real or not? Like this is the big argument with Elon and Twitter. Because Elon asked Twitter, like, what percentage of your website is filled with bots? And they say 5%. And he says, I don't believe you. I think it's higher. And let's find out how you've come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
And, you know, I believe they said that they just took 100 random Twitter pages and looked at the interaction. And there's some sort of an algorithm they applied to it. But how do you discern?
Okay, before he answers that question, I want you to look at the look on Mark Zuckerberg's face. Okay. It's not perfect. They don't always get it right. And sometimes, you know, I have my opinion of why that happens. But, you know, you have to be careful with the bots. Like they pick up things sometimes that actually is not in violation, but it'll pick it up just because it thinks that it is. And so this is why you really can't rely. You can't rely on that. Numerous times I've come onto this show and I've told you guys, Hardlands Media, you know, is going through this issue. I don't want to get too far into it because of, I gotta be careful what I say, but they were always able to appeal it and it was overturned every time. That just goes to show you how bad and misleading the bots can be sometimes. But I'm going to let Mark go ahead and kind of throw himself under the bus here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think estimating the overall prevalence is one thing. But I think that the question of looking at a page and is this page authentic? I think that there's a bunch of signals around that. One of the things that we try to do is for large pages, we try to make sure that we know who the admin of that page is. We don't necessarily, you should be able to run an anonymous page. You don't necessarily need to out yourself and say who you are running it, but we want to make sure that we sort of have like an identity for that person on file, so that way we know, like at least behind the scenes, that that person is real. For certain political things, I think having a sense.
I call BS on that because it's not always necessarily about whether or not someone's real. It's more so about what is the narrative that they're telling and does that fit what's acceptable to the alphabet group organizations. That's more so what it's about. I'll be honest with you. There are multiple pages on Facebook that I know for damn sure are not real, but they're there. So of course he's going to lead with that to make it seem like, hey, what we're doing was not that bad. We're not really trying to censor people or anything like that, but they are. Let's let them go on.
Of what country they're originating from. I mean, some of that you can do just by looking at where their server traffic comes from, like is the IP address coming from Romania or, you know, because if it's like an ad in some other country's election, then, you know, you probably want to make sure that that ad is you know, especially in countries that have laws around that, are coming from someone who's a valid citizen or like at least in that place. So there's a bunch of, I think, I don't know, one theme in my worldview around this stuff, when it gets to some of the stuff that we talked about before, is like, I don't think that this stuff is black and white or that you're ever going to have like a perfect AI system. I think it's all trade-offs all the way down, right? And you could build a system and you can either be overly aggressive and capture a higher percent of the bad guys, but then also by accident take out some number of good guys. Or you could be a little more lenient and say, okay, no, the cost of taking out any number of good guys is too high, so we're going to tolerate having, just a little bit more, more bad guys on the system.
Sounds like it's all over the place to me. And it's interesting. Look at the look on his face. Look, you can tell he's kind of fishing here a little bit. He doesn't seem comfortable answering this question. And also, I just want to go on and say, too, that it's kind of interesting to me how he says bad guys and good guys. Like, what determines necessarily on social media if you're a bad guy or a good guy per se? So what? You have a page and maybe it's not actually your name. Many of people I see on Facebook don't use their real name. Does that make them a bad guy? No, I don't think this is war per se, good guy, bad guy. I don't think this is team sports here where you have good guy, bad guy. I think he's kind of fishing for what to say. And you can tell by the look on his face, it's just like, okay, how am I going to answer this question and not make it as obvious that, yeah, we are taking away certain types of information because we're told to do so. And he doesn't even, get all the way there because he ends up giving things away.
These are values questions, right? Around what do you value more, and those are super tricky questions. And part of what I've struggled with around this is I didn't get into this to basically judge those things. I got into this to design technology that helps people connect, right? It's like, and like, you could probably tell when we spent the first hour talking about the metaverse and the future of basically building this whole technology roadmap to basically give people this realistic sense of presence. It's like, that's what I'm here to do, right? So this whole thing that's like arbitrating what is okay and what is not, I obviously have to be involved in that because this is at some level, I run the company and I can't just abdicate that. But I also don't think that as a matter of governance, you want all of that decision-making vested in one individual. So I think one of the things that our country and our government gets right is the separation of powers.
Here we go. See, yeah, he probably didn't get into this to have to worry about what people are saying, what people are putting on there, but somebody told him to, and that's the US government. That's what this is about. Again, he looks so nervous, uncomfortable in this interview, but he's giving a lot away here. We're going to go back into it really quick, guys. Go ahead and do a like if you haven't had a chance to do so. That really helps me out with the algorithm. Hit that like button, hawk smash it. Let's go back in.
So, one of the things that I tried to create is we created this oversight board. It's an independent board that basically we appointed people whose kind of paramount value is free expression, but they also balance that with things like when is there going to be real harm to others in terms of safety or privacy or other human rights issues. And basically that board, people in our community can appeal cases to when they think that we got it wrong. And that board actually gets to make the final binding decision, not us. So in a way,
it's always funny to me when they say independent boards, because I never believe that they're independent. I never believe they're independent. I'm sorry. It's just, I don't know. I don't buy it.
I actually think that is a more legitimate form of governance than having just a team internally that makes these decisions, or maybe some of them go up to me, although I don't spend a ton of my time on this on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's generally good to have some kind of separation of powers where you're architecting the governance so that way you have different stakeholders and different people who can make these decisions, and it's not just like one private company that's making decisions even about what just happens on our platform.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York
we
Post.
had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is,
You heard what he just said, right? Like he just let that all out. Cat out of the bag. He said, yeah, so the FBI came to us. I'm like, what? Wait, what? I told you all of these groups were working together. All of them. The alphabet letter groups and social media, all of the platforms, they're all working together. That's who's really controlling the information.
they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for the, I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
It got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it.
Ah ha ha ha. Let's hear this again because this proves my point about suppression. Listen to this, guys.
Important misinformation. We also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for the, I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less.
The ranking in the news feed was a little bit less. This is how they suppress content. It's not just Facebook that does it. YouTube does it. This is how they suppress people. They rank it lower so that it has less of a chance coming across more people. So more eyes don't get on it. You see, he just let the cat out the bag. Now, this is something that we've been kind of feeling for a while, but he just kind of told everyone. He let it all out. Now, what was interesting is he said, well, people could still share it, but it wouldn't come up in people's news feed as much because we ranked it lower. And then here's the question that I have. If people were still allowed to share it and more people are sharing it, right? How is it still not coming up in the news feed? Because typically the way it works with the algorithm is the more people share, the more people hit that like button with Facebook and with YouTube, both of them do it this way, the more eyes it will get. And what he is telling you is that behind the scenes, they have made it so that even if a lot of people were to share it, a lot of people won't see it. That's what they did. Suppression like a mofo. What'd I tell you? We told you guys this was happening. Suppression like a mofo. Literally, if you think about it, I mean, I have, what am I now? I'm somewhat over, I'm 20 something K subs, right? Okay. So, and it's an election year, right? Midterm year. If it had been probably about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, those of us at RBN, we would have way more subs than we do right now. Way more. That's how much they're suppressing it. And I know it because when a lot of you, when you're new, you're like, holy crap, I didn't know about this channel. So we know we're not coming up. See what they're doing? Let's let him bury himself even more.
So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely,
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But I mean, but basically, a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper political issue. So depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's a very professional law enforcement, if they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be?
Long story short, they suppressed the laptop story. Most people that I spoke to, especially people that don't watch independent media, didn't even know about it. Didn't even know that it was a thing.
Be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
When something like that turns out to be real, is there regret for not having it evenly distributed and for throttling the distribution of that story?
What do you mean evenly distributed?
I mean evenly in that it's not suppressed. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it turned out after the fact. The fact checkers looked into it. No one was able to say it was false, right? So basically, it had this period where it was getting list distribution. So yeah. But I think I think it sucks though. I think in the same way that probably having to go through like a criminal trial but being proven innocent in the end sucks. Like it still sucks to have like that you had to go through a criminal trial, but at the end you're free. So it's I don't know if the answer would have been don't do anything or don't have any process. I think the process was pretty reasonable.
This is not a criminal trial. This is nothing like a criminal trial. But they are indeed, basically, he's saying that they're playing judge and jury. Basically. That's what he just compared it to, a criminal trial. Mark, I hope, look, if you ever do something dirty behind the scenes, Mark, don't ever do anything dirty behind the scenes. In your life, don't do anything dirty behind the scenes because you would be a big red flag. We can see right through you. You look very nervous and uncomfortable. So just play it straight and narrow. Don't do anything that you shouldn't do because you would give yourself away.
We still let people share it, but obviously you don't want situations like that.
What's certainly much more reasonable than Twitter's stance, and it's probably also the case of armchair quarterbacking, right? Or at least Monday morning quarterbacking, I should say. Because in the moment, you had reason to believe, based on the FBI talking to you, that it wasn't real and that there was going to be some propaganda. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And then if you just let it get out there, and what if it changes the election and it turns out to be bullshit? That's a real problem. And I would imagine that those kind of decisions are the most difficult. The decisions of like what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Yeah. What would you do in that situation?
I don't know what I would do. I would have to like really thoroughly. Well, first of all, you're dealing with the New York Post, which is one of the oldest newspapers in the country.
Joe, come on. You have to know what you would do. You see how they tried to censor you. You see how Spotify tried to censor you. Like, I can't believe I'm surprised he's saying he doesn't know what he would. Come on. I don't know. I don't know. No defense for Mark Zuckerberg on this, though. No defense. I'm not defending him at all. I think it's BS. You are basically censoring information, and it's really ridiculous that like you can't even control your own platform now. This is what has happened. You have no control over your own platform. I want to make sure everybody understands that. Even though he created it, he is letting you know now he has no control over his own platform. That's not a good feeling.
So I would say I would want to talk to someone from the New York Post, and I would say, how did you come up with this data? Like, where are you getting the information from? How do you know whether or not this is correct? And then you have to make a decision because they might have got duped. It's hard because everybody wants to look at it after the fact. Now that we know that the laptop was real, and then it was a legitimate story, and there is potential corruption involved with him. What we think, oh, that should not have been restricted. That should not have been banned from sharing on Twitter.
I always thought it was real. I always thought that story was real. I was not one of those people that's like, oh, I don't believe that. I was like, nah, I believe it. I'm sorry. I put nothing past Joe Biden. I put nothing past Hunter Biden. I don't care if you're president. I don't care if you're a congressman. I don't care if you're a senator. Actually, that might make me even more suspicious of you. That basically does not put you past like doing anything that you're not supposed to do. Politicians are known for being corrupt. So I actually did believe it. That's just me. Sorry, but can't give everybody the benefit of the doubt.
Right. I think everybody agrees with that. Even Twitter agrees with that. But the thing is, then they didn't think that. In the beginning, they thought it was fake. So what do? Like, if something comes along and the Republicans cook up some scheme to make it look like Joe Biden's a terrible person, and they only do it so that they can win the election, but it's really just propaganda. What are you supposed to do with that? You're supposed to not allow that to be distributed. So if they think that's the case, it makes sense to me that they would try to stop it. But I just don't think that they looked at it hard enough.
I think that Joe and Mark here are they're being a little too nice about the FBI. I'm sorry. Let's remember the group we're talking about here, the organization, right? The same organization that went after MLK, the same organization that went after Malcolm X, the same organization that recently just went after the Black Socialist group, the Uhuru group. Why would you trust anything they say? I don't trust it. I'm sorry, but I guess, I don't know. They kind of sound a little naive here. I don't know if that's just for show. I don't know what it is. I don't know if maybe they just can't say certain things. I don't know, but I don't know. I was raised never to trust them. And because of the people that I just told you about, because of people like MLK, because of people like Malcolm X, because of the way that they came after people like Fred Hampton, I was raised, don't you ever trust them. So I think they're giving the FBI a little too much leeway here. No, I don't put anything past them. You can't trust them.
When the New York Post is talking about it, you know, they're pretty smart about what they release and what they don't release. If they're going over some data from a laptop and you could talk to a person, but again, like, this is just one story, like one individual story. Like, how many of these pop up every day, especially in regards to polarizing issues like climate change or COVID or you know, foreign policy or Ukraine. Anytime there's like a really controversial issue where some people think that it's imperative that you take a very specific stance and you can't have the other stance. Mm-hmm. Like those moments on social media, those trouble a lot of people because they don't know why certain things get censored or certain things get promoted.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's like to be in your spot. And I was one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is this, because like to be in your spot must be insanely difficult to have. No matter what decision you make, you're going to have a giant chunk of people that are upset at you. And there might be a right way to handle it, but I don't know what the fuck right way is.
Well, I think the right way is to establish principles for governance that try to be balanced and not have the decision making too centralized. Because
this just sounds cop-like to me. Like, no, like I'm not going to play the whole interview. I'm going to let him finish here, and then I'm going to show you what Second Thought has to say about this whole censorship thing. By the way, if you don't follow Second Thought on YouTube, I highly recommend that you do. He does really good videos, but this just sounds cop-like to me. Like, I don't understand. What is it? I envy your position because of the situation you're in. I don't want to be in that situation. Mark is all right. Mark's a billionaire. He's going to be okay. But I mean, the thing is this is like, no, I feel like they would snitch on me right now. Like I really, I feel like if I was sitting at a table across from Mark Zuckerberg, I feel like he would snitch. That's the impression I'm getting right now. I can't. No.
I think that it's hard for people to accept that like some team at Meta or that I personally am making all these decisions. And I think people should be skeptical about any so much concentration around that. So that's why a lot of the innovation that I've tried to push for in governance is around things like establishing this oversight board. So that way you have people who are luminaries around expression from all over the world, but also in the US. Folks like Michael McConnell, who's is a Stanford professor, who's like he was I forget which Republican president appointed him, but he was I think going to be considered for the Supreme Court at some point. He's a very very prominent and kind of celebrated free expression advocate, and he helped me set the thing up. And
oh, surprise! What do you know? The free expression advocate is the one who helped him set it up.
I think like setting up forms of governance around that are independent of us, that basically get the final say on a bunch of these decisions, and that's a step in the right direction.
No, it's not, because those independent of us groups that he's talking about, if the organizations of the alphabet letter group are following Facebook, what the hell makes you think that they're not following that independent group, Mark? You think that group is off the table, that's off limits? They can't touch them. They can't follow them. Are you kidding me? I can't. Bye, Mark. I really again, I feel like he sounds so gullible. That is going to be the discussion tonight for the call-in segment, FYI. I want to hear from you guys. We need to talk about that. But I want you to hear what Second Thought has to say about a lot of this, because he breaks this down in a different way about the censorship and the media. More so, the internet. The name of this video is called Censorship and the Future of the Internet, and it's by Second Thought. And shout out to JB, because JB is the one who actually told me about Second Thought. He's going to explain some things here that I think you need to hear.
Internet was first developed, many people had high hopes that it would become a sort of digital commons, a place where people could gather and freely exchange information, sort of like a giant public library. As we all know, that is not what became of the internet. As soon as corporations figured out just how lucrative this new frontier would be, the project was poisoned and it became just another tentacle of the modern market. In today's modern internet, all of our activity and information passes through the hands of private companies, who have final say over what is accessible, visible, and permissible on the internet. People tend to forget that Google is not some universal public utility. It's part of a giant company that exists within the internet.
Let's pause here for a second. I'm so glad he said that. Yes, Google is not a separate entity. It's not a separate thing. It's not a public utility. I think it should be a public utility. People have been arguing for that and advocating for that. But I want you to look at this picture here that he's pointing out. You'll see here's Google, and I've explained this before when I talked about politician donors. Google is a part of Alphabet Group. So there are other organizations here as well. Life Sciences, Google X, Google Ventures, Google Fiber, Nest. So it actually doesn't belong to us, you guys. So this is important for people to pay attention to.
When you're engaging with a Google property like YouTube, your right to free speech is checked at the door. Whereas your physical world is controlled by your country's government, your digital life is ruled by massive corporations and a handful of absurdly wealthy individuals. It is against the interest of these companies and billionaires to allow the free exchange of information on their platforms.
Did you just hear that? It is against the rules for those people like Susan, who is the CEO of YouTube. They just showed a picture of Mark Zuckerberg to allow for free information, free censor uncensored information on their platform. They can't do that. You heard what he just said?
Instead, sites like YouTube and Twitter are meticulously curated in order to mediate the conversation and most effectively monetize our traffic. YouTube tells you what to watch next, and it's always videos that will make them money. The ones from big channels, videos that are monetized and highly shareable, like, for example, the aforementioned PragerU. Same with Twitter and Facebook. You're served tailored ads and recommendations that align with what those companies want you to engage with. This is the problem in a nutshell. In a world where the internet is a necessity for most people, where our news is online, our shopping, our education, does it seem appropriate that these corporations operate almost entirely outside the control of governing bodies and the general populace? Perhaps it's time to consider a new Internet Bill of Rights to protect reasonable speech online. The internet at this point is essentially a public utility based solely on its necessity in modern life. Sites like YouTube and Facebook are essentially monopolies. There are no real alternatives, but these companies are not regulated like monopolies.
See, I'll show you the picture here. Let's pause right there just for the picture. You have YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, and Vimeo, and these are the most popular video streaming services in the United States as of September 2019. And again, he told you that it basically operates like, is technically a monopoly, but doesn't operate like one.
Monopolies. There are no real alternatives, but these companies are not regulated like monopolies. Take your local water company, for example. It's a public utility, and everyone is served at the same level. If the water utility were run like Facebook, they could divert water away from undesirable areas and towards certain other areas that have somehow earned their favor in opaque ways. We're still very new to the internet, and especially social media. The World Wide Web has only really existed since 1990, and Facebook has only been around since 2004. The massive amount of transformative change that has occurred in the past 30 years has vastly outpaced our understanding of what the internet could be. By now, it should be clear that the internet will be the dominating factor of modern life for the foreseeable future, and we need to take it seriously. We need to make plans for how to ensure that the internet doesn't simply become a propaganda tool to be wielded by massive corporations that are free from oversight. Whether this means transforming the internet into a public utility or building an entirely new, unmonetized alternative to the corporate internet is up for debate. But it's certainly something we need to consider. Just as libraries serve as an effective public institution allowing for the democratization of learning, a public alternative to the internet as it currently exists could democratize the flow of information in our digital age, free from the coercion of private interests, manipulated news feeds, and targeted advertising. But to return to the issue of my CIA video for a moment, there is another factor to consider. While multi-billion-dollar corporations are the main driver of internet curation and censorship in America, many of these companies have lucrative contracts with government agencies.
Boom. What was that? Many of these companies have contracts with government agencies. There you go. Somebody call Mark Zuckerberg. You hear that?
Including the CIA. Sometimes there will be actual instances of government censorship in the United States. I believe my CIA video is one example. If YouTube would just be transparent about their reasoning for the shadow ban, I wouldn't complain. But the fact that they tried to be covert about it, then lied about the cause is alarming. The CIA and the military-industrial complex have long waged a sort of psychological campaign to manufacture consent among the American public. The Department of War became the Department of Defense. Every action the US takes abroad is in the name of national security, even when we're meddling in tiny nations that could never do anything to harm us even if they wanted to. Censorship is not simply a matter of restricting access to content critical of the status quo. It also entails promoting material that's designed to reinforce that status quo.
That's right. To promote certain material to reinforce that status quo. Keep that in mind.
Manufacture a sense of patriotism, American exceptionalism, and fear of the unknown. We need to be aware of the extent to which the powers that be are influencing the content we consume online, and that those powers are not only government agencies, but also powerful corporations that benefit from our country's warlike nature.
Yep. That's 100% true. This is why they've been going after kids on places like TikTok. They've been going after kids on places like Twitch. There's a reason why you see the ads that you see. And people wondered why I didn't like commercials growing up. I really did not like commercials.
As you know, YouTube treats its creators horribly. The shadow banning of my last video is just the most recent example.
Definitely check out this video because I didn't play the entire thing. I think I started about 4 or 5 minutes in. So definitely check it out. It's called Censorship and the Future of the Internet. And that is by Second Thought. So again, shout out to JB because he is the one that told me about Second Thought. His videos are really good. I think he has like over 1 million subs. All right, I'm gonna go to some of the comments here. Oz says, Zucky suspended me and Convo Couch from live stream for 30 days without explanation. The guy is a pathological liar. I'm sorry to hear that, Oz. I don't even stream on Facebook. I only stream obviously here, hello, and Rockfin and Twitter. Marlene says, when I share you all on Facebook, I don't see it on my page. I have to share it a second time. You guys see how they do this? JB says, if the alphabet gurus tell them what to do, then Facebook, that's sus at the very least. Yeah. Thank you for the super chat. CS, you think calling it alphabet is a play on words? I've wondered that, CS. Maybe it is.